The aliens found Earth's hidden shipyard, then millions of human engines started. The alien scout ship Vantis I moved slowly through the dark, far past the edge of the solar system, where the sun was only a bright star among many others. Its sensors swept space in wide arcs, looking for signs of danger, signs of life, signs of anything that might matter to the coalition of starfaring peoples. For 300 years, the coalition had watched the small blue planet called Earth from a safe distance. They had never landed. They had never even sent a probe close enough to be noticed. Earth was marked in every coalition record with a single word: quarantined. No one alive in the coalition fleet remembered exactly why the quarantine had been placed. The order had come down through so many generations of command that it had become simple habit, like breathing. Ships passed by the blue-green world and did not stop. Scientists who asked questions were told to look elsewhere. And so, for centuries, humanity grew up alone, unaware that eyes far above their sky sometimes paused, just for a moment, before moving on. Captain Thessa Rowe of the Vantis I did not care about old orders. She was young by coalition standards, barely 200 years old, and she had grown tired of patrolling empty space, while older captains got all the credit for real discoveries. When her ship's long-range sensors picked up something strange near the outer edge of Earth's solar system, an old, cold shape drifting in the black, far larger than any human vessel should be, she felt her hearts beat faster. "Report," she said, standing at the center of her bridge. Around her, screens glowed with soft blue light, and her crew, all 4 species of them, worked quietly at their stations. Her sensor officer, a slim, silver-skinned being named Corin, tilted his head at his display. "Captain, we are reading a metallic structure approximately 40 kilometers in length. It appears to be a shipyard, an old one, possibly abandoned." "A shipyard," Thessa repeated. "Whose?" "Unknown, Captain. The design does not match any coalition record. But the materials are old, very old. Some parts of the structure show signs of decay consistent with 200 years of exposure to vacuum." Thessa frowned. 200 years ago, the quarantine order on Earth had already been in place for over a century. If this shipyard belonged to Earth, then someone down on that primitive little planet had been building something far beyond what coalition records said humans were capable of. According to the old files, Earth held only simple technology. No true starflight, no advanced weapons, nothing worth the coalition's attention beyond the quarantine itself. "Bring us closer," Thessa ordered. "Slow approach. I want full scans before we get within 5,000 kilometers." The Vantis I eased forward, engines humming low, careful and quiet. As the distance closed, more details appeared on the screens. The structure was not just a shipyard, it was a graveyard of shipyards, dozens of enormous metal frames, strung together in a loose, orbiting ring, far beyond Earth's moon, hidden in the shadow of a large asteroid that had been moved into place, deliberately, to block the sun's light and any watching eyes. "Someone built this to be hidden," Corin said quietly. "This asteroid was moved here on purpose. The angles, the shadow, the placement. This is not natural." Thessa felt a chill run through her. Whoever had built this had known they were being watched, or at least suspected it, and had gone to enormous trouble to hide their work. That kind of planning did not come from primitive minds. "Let me see the shipyard itself," she said. The image sharpened on the main screen. Rows and rows of half-finished hulls floated within massive metal skeletons, some barely started, others nearly complete. There were hundreds of them. No, Thessa realized as the scan continued, there were thousands. She had never seen anything like it, not even at the greatest coalition shipyards near the capital world. "Corin, give me a count." Corin's hands moved quickly over his console. When he answered, his voice had lost its usual calm. "Captain, I am reading approximately 11,000 individual ship hulls within this structure. Sizes vary from small fighter craft to vessels larger than our own carrier-class ships. Many appear complete, or nearly complete. None show any current power signature. They are dormant." 11,000 ships. Thessa's mind raced. No single world, no matter how advanced, built 11,000 ships in secret without someone noticing. Unless they had been building for a very long time. Unless they had been preparing for something. Could this be from before the quarantine? She asked. Some old war fleet, abandoned when the order came down? Unclear, Captain. But if I may. Corin hesitated, checking his readings twice before speaking again. The construction dates, based on decay patterns, span roughly 180 years. That means this shipyard has been in continuous, active use for nearly 2 centuries. Someone has been building ships here the entire time we believed Earth was quarantined and untouched. The bridge went quiet. Even the low hum of the engines seemed to fade into the background, as the crew absorbed what that meant. For 200 years, while the Coalition patrolled the edges of the solar system and told itself that Earth was a sleepy, harmless little world, unworthy of attention, someone on that planet had been building an armada. Thessa's first instinct was fear. Her second was ambition. If she could be the one to report this discovery, to bring proof of a hidden human shipyard back to the Coalition Council, her name would be remembered for generations. This was bigger than any discovery in 100 years. Send a tight beam report to Coalition Command, she said. Encrypted. Highest priority. Tell them we have found evidence of a massive hidden shipbuilding operation near Earth, in direct violation of the quarantine. Request further instructions. Transmitting now, Captain, said her communications officer, a small blue-furred being named Wexa. While they waited for a response, which would take hours, given the distance to the nearest relay station, Thessa ordered the Vantis Eye to continue its slow approach, gathering more data. She wanted to know everything about this place before Command told her what to do next. As the ship crept closer, more strange details emerged. The shipyard was not simply hidden behind an asteroid. It was wrapped in layers of camouflage technology, materials that bent light and scattered sensor pulses, making the entire structure difficult to detect even at close range. Whoever had built this understood stealth technology at a level the Coalition had not expected from a species still confined to a single, primitive world. Captain, Corin said suddenly, his voice tight. I'm picking up something new. A weak power signature. Very faint. It's coming from the center of the shipyard structure. Thessa's heart skipped, defying faint. It could be a malfunctioning sensor array, or it could be something waking up. Corin turned to look at her. I recommend we hold position and observe from a safer distance, Captain. If something down there detects us. We came here to investigate, Corin. I'm not turning back because of a flicker on a sensor screen. Thessa's voice was firm, though a small part of her agreed with his caution. Maintain current distance. Keep all scans running. If anything changes, I want to know immediately. The ship held its position, engines idling low, sensors sweeping the vast structure ahead. Minutes passed, then an hour. The bridge crew worked in near silence, occasionally exchanging quiet words about readings and calculations. Thessa watched the main screen, studying the endless rows of dormant ships, wondering what kind of people had built them, and why. She thought about the quarantine order again. If Earth had been hiding an armada this size, then the quarantine had not kept humanity contained. It had, perhaps, given them exactly the privacy they needed to prepare for something. But prepare for what? An invasion? A war? Or simply survival, in case the Coalition ever decided that Earth's resources, or its strategic position, made it worth conquering, rather than merely observing. Captain, Wexa called from her station. We have a response from Coalition Command. On screen. The message was short, and it did nothing to calm the growing unease on the bridge. Coalition Command ordered the Vantis Eye to hold position, gather additional intelligence, and prepare for the arrival of a larger fleet within the next several days. A senior admiral, someone named Torvex Lin, would be taking personal command of the investigation. Thessa was to touch nothing, disturb nothing, and above all, avoid any action that might alert whoever controlled the shipyard to the Coalition's presence. They're sending Admiral Torvex, Wexa said, reading further into the message, with the 2nd Battle Fleet. Thessa's stomach tightened. The 2nd Battle Fleet was no small patrol group. It included 6 capital ships, dozens of escorts, and enough firepower to level a moon. If Coalition Command was sending that much force to investigate a single hidden shipyard, then someone far above her rank believed this discovery was more than just interesting. They believed it was dangerous. Understood, she said quietly. We hold position and continue observation. While they waited for the 2nd Battle Fleet to arrive, Thessa found time to pull up the old Coalition files on Earth, the ones nobody bothered to read anymore, because they were considered settled history. The files were thin, oddly thin, for a world the Coalition had watched for so long. There were notes on the planet's atmosphere, its gravity, its rough population estimates from centuries ago. There were photographs taken from orbit, blurry and old, showing cities lit up at night in scattered patterns across the continents. And there was the quarantine order itself, dated so far back that the officer who signed it was probably long dead. The reasoning given for the quarantine was vague. Species assessed as unstable and violent, prone to internal conflict, deemed unsuitable for contact at this stage of development. That was all. No mention of any specific incident. No record of what had prompted such caution toward a world that, according to every other file, could barely leave its own atmosphere. That's strange, Corin said, reading over her shoulder. Usually quarantine orders list the triggering event. First contact gone wrong, a border dispute, evidence of aggressive expansion. This one just says unstable and violent, like someone was in a hurry to write it and didn't want to explain further. Or like someone didn't want the real reason recorded, Thessa said quietly. They did not have long to dwell on the mystery. Wexa called out from her station. Captain, we're picking up something odd in the old records. A supply ship, listed as lost with all crew, 300 years ago, in this general region of space. Lost how? Unknown, Captain. The report says only that contact was lost, and no wreckage was ever found. Wexa looked up from her screen. Given what we've found here, I wonder if that ship didn't get lost at all. I wonder if it found something it wasn't supposed to find. The thought hung in the air, unspoken, but understood by everyone on the bridge. Perhaps the quarantine had not been placed out of caution toward a primitive world. Perhaps it had been placed because someone, 3 centuries ago, had already learned that Earth was not as harmless as it appeared, and had decided the safest thing to do was to look away and hope the problem stayed contained on its own. Over the following 2 days, the Vantis Eye remained in place, its sensors constantly probing the ancient shipyard. Thessa's crew cataloged as many of the ship hulls as they could, noting differences in design, size, and apparent purpose. Some of the vessels looked like simple cargo haulers. Others carried weapon mounts unlike anything in Coalition records. Strange, elegant shapes that suggested advanced engineering, hidden beneath crude, functional exteriors. It's like they built 2 things at once, Corin observed during one of their long shifts. Some of these ships are almost primitive in their construction. Simple metal, basic joints, nothing fancy. But the engines, the weapon systems, the internal architecture, those are sophisticated. More sophisticated than some of our own designs. As if the outside doesn't matter to them, Thessa mused. As if they only care about what works. Function over form, Corin agreed. It's an odd philosophy for a species we believed was still struggling with basic infrastructure on their own homeworld. Thessa said nothing, but she found herself staring at the image of the shipyard for a long moment, feeling, for the first time in her long career, a genuine sense of unease about a species the Coalition had always dismissed as harmless. On the 3rd day, Admiral Torvex Lin's fleet arrived. The 2nd Battle Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, in a precise formation a safe distance from the hidden shipyard. 6 massive capital ships surrounded by a swarm of smaller escorts, their combined mass casting long shadows across the starlit dark. Thessa watched from the Vantis Eye's bridge, as the Admiral's flagship, the Dominion's Will, took position at the center of the formation, its running lights blinking steady and calm against the void. A priority channel opened, and Admiral Torvex's face appeared on the main screen, an older being with pale gray skin, deep-set eyes, and the calm, measured expression of someone who had commanded fleets for centuries. Captain Rowe, he said, good work finding this. Give me your full report. Thessa relayed everything they had gathered, the size of the shipyard, the number of ships, the age of the construction, the strange mixture of primitive and advanced technology, and the faint power signature Corin had detected days earlier. Admiral Torvex listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. 11,000 ships, he said finally. Built in secret, over nearly 2 centuries, by a species we classified as pre-Starflight, and confined to a single world. He shook his head slowly. Someone has been very careless with our intelligence reports, Captain. Or someone down on that planet has been very, very patient. What are your orders, Admiral? We move in closer, full fleet formation. I want a complete survey of that shipyard before we decide anything else. If this is some kind of defense project, we need to understand its scope before we consider any further action toward Earth. Before the fleet moved in, Admiral Torvex called a short briefing across all ships, his image appearing on every bridge at once. He stood tall in his dark uniform, hands clasped behind his back, and spoke with the steady tone of someone who had given 1,000 briefings before. "Officers of the Second Battle Fleet," he began, "what we have found here changes our understanding of the Earth situation. I want to be clear with all of you. We are not here to start a war. We are here to gather information and to protect Coalition space if that information proves to be a threat. Every action from this point forward will be measured, careful, and fully documented. I will not have this turn into an incident that starts a conflict none of us are prepared for." He paused, looking directly into the camera, as though he could see every officer listening. "That said, I want every crew at full readiness. If those ships are armed, if they are hostile, we will not hesitate to defend ourselves and this fleet. Am I understood?" A chorus of acknowledgements came back across the channel. Thessa gave her own confirmation, then closed the connection and turned to her crew. "You heard the Admiral. Full readiness, but no provocation. We watch, we record, we report." Corin nodded, though his hands were already moving quickly across his console, adjusting sensor arrays to their maximum range. Wexa kept one eye on the communication logs, ready to relay any order the instant it came through. The rest of the bridge crew settled into the quiet, focused rhythm of a ship preparing for something uncertain. The fleet advanced together, a slow and careful approach, 6 capital ships and their escorts closing the distance to the ancient, hidden structure. Sensors from every vessel swept the shipyard, gathering more data than the Vantis eye alone could ever have managed. Thessa watched the readings pour in, each new detail adding to a picture that grew stranger and more unsettling by the hour. Thessa took a moment to study the largest of the dormant hulls on her screen, a vessel so long it dwarfed even the Dominion's will. Its shape was strange to her eyes, blunt and heavy in places, sleek and sharp in others, as though it had been designed by 2 very different minds working from 2 very different ideas of what a warship should look like. She wondered what kind of engineers built something like that. She wondered what they had been thinking, out there in the dark, hidden from the rest of the galaxy, building fleet after fleet, for reasons no one outside their own world understood. "Captain," Corin said, breaking her thoughts, "sensor resolution is improving as we close the distance. I'm getting clearer readings on hull composition now. It's not like anything in the Coalition database. The metal alloys are unusual, stronger than our standard hull plating, but lighter. And there's something else. Radiation traces suggest some of these vessels use power cores far more advanced than anything we'd expect from a species without proven starflight capability." "How advanced?" Corin hesitated. "Potentially comparable to our own capital ship reactors, Captain. Possibly better." That single sentence did more to unsettle Thessa than anything else she had learned so far. A species without confirmed starflight technology should not have reactors comparable to Coalition capital ships. Someone had been wrong about Earth for a very long time, and the mistake was about to become impossible to ignore. Then, without warning, the faint power signature Corin had detected days earlier began to change. "Captain." "Multiple power signatures now, across the entire structure," Corin called out, his voice rising with alarm. They're growing, rapidly." On the main screen, small points of light began appearing across the vast shipyard, one after another, then dozens, then hundreds, spreading like sparks catching flame across dry grass. Thessa stared, her hearts pounding, as the dormant ships that had drifted silent and lifeless for who knew how long began, one by one, to wake up. "Admiral," she said into the open channel, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and awe. "Something is happening. The ships, they're activating." On the Dominion's will, Admiral Torvex leaned forward in his command chair, his calm expression finally cracking as the sensor reports flooded in. Across the entire hidden shipyard, engine after engine flared to life, thousands of small blue-white lights blazing in the dark, like a field of stars being born all at once. The count climbed with terrifying speed. 1,000, 3,000, 7,000, until it seemed as though the whole structure had become a single living thing, humming with power, that had been waiting, silent and patient, for exactly this moment. "All ships, Torvek said, his voice suddenly sharp and commanding, cutting through the stunned silence on his bridge. Raise shields, weapons to stand by. I want. He never finished the order. Across the vast shipyard, the first of the awakened vessels began to move. The quarantine, whatever its original purpose had been, was about to be tested in a way no one in the coalition had ever imagined. And on the bridge of the Vantis Eye, Captain Thessa Rowe watched the lights multiply across her screen, feeling the full weight of what she had discovered settle over her like a physical thing. She had wanted her name remembered. Now she wondered if she would live long enough to hear it spoken again. The lights kept multiplying across the shipyard, blue-white flares of engine ignition spreading through the massive structure, like fire racing through a dry field. Admiral Torvek stood frozen for only a heartbeat before his training took over. He had commanded fleets through border skirmishes and pirate hunts, but nothing had prepared him for watching 11,000 ships wake up at once. All ships, defensive formation. He barked. Shields at maximum, weapons hot, but hold fire unless fired upon. I want a tactical picture on my screen now. Across the second battle fleet, 6 capital ships and their escorts pulled into a tight defensive ring, engines flaring as they adjusted position. On the Vantis Eye, Thessa gripped the arms of her command chair, watching the chaos unfold on her screens. The count of active ships in the shipyard kept climbing. 9,000, 10,000, more than she could track. Captain, movement detected, Corin called out, his voice tight with tension. Multiple vessels breaking away from the shipyard structure. They're not approaching us directly. They're spreading out, forming some kind of perimeter. Thessa leaned forward, watching the tactical display. The awakened human ships were not charging toward the coalition fleet in an attack formation. Instead, they were moving outward in a slow, deliberate pattern, taking up positions around the shipyard itself, as though forming a protective wall between the coalition ships and whatever lay at the structure's heart. They're defending it, she murmured. Not attacking us. Defending their shipyard. Confirmed, Captain, Corin said. No weapons are currently active on any of the human vessels. Their shields are down. They are simply positioning themselves. On the Dominion's will, Admiral Torvex watched the same pattern unfold and felt a small measure of relief mixed with even greater unease. A hostile force would have attacked immediately, using the element of surprise to their advantage. Instead, these ships were behaving with a kind of restrained discipline that suggested someone, somewhere, was in careful control of the entire fleet, even though every vessel had been dormant just minutes before. Someone is commanding them, Torvex said to his tactical officer, a stocky, four-armed being named Grask. This isn't automated defense. This is coordinated, intelligent response. Should we hail them, Admiral? Grask asked. Torvex considered the question for a long moment. Hailing an unknown fleet of this size carried real risk, if the ships were hostile despite their current posture. Opening communications might expose coalition weaknesses or give away tactical information. But remaining silent while 11,000 ships arranged themselves around his fleet felt equally dangerous, perhaps more so. Open a channel, he said finally. Broadcast on all standard frequencies, and any human frequencies our language databases can identify. Let them know we are not here to attack. The message went out, translated into as many Earth languages as the Coalition database contained, though the entries were old and possibly outdated after 2 centuries of silence. For a long moment, there was no response. The awakened human ships continued their slow, methodical positioning, ignoring the Coalition fleet entirely. Then, abruptly, every screen across the second battle fleet flickered, and a new image appeared. It showed a woman, perhaps in her 50s by human standards, seated in what looked like a simple, functional command chair. She wore a plain gray uniform with no obvious markings of rank, though something about the way she held herself, calm and unhurried, suggested she was used to being obeyed. Behind her, screens displayed rapidly scrolling data that Thessa's crew immediately began trying to translate. This is Fleet Commander Elena Voss, the woman said, her voice steady and clear, speaking on behalf of the Earth Defense Coalition. You are currently within the boundary of a restricted zone. State your identity and your purpose here. The message repeated in several other languages after her initial statement, giving the impression that this Elena Voss expected to be addressing more than one type of listener, and had prepared for that possibility. On the Dominion's will, Admiral Torvex exchanged a glance with Grask before responding. He kept his voice measured and calm, projecting an image of an experienced, reasonable commander. Fleet Commander Voss, this is Admiral Torvex Lin, of the Coalition of Starfaring Peoples. We detected this structure during routine monitoring of your system. We were not aware it was inhabited or active. We mean no harm to you or your vessels. We request a dialogue to understand what we have found here. There was a pause before Voss responded, long enough that Thessa wondered if the translation had failed, or if Voss was consulting with someone off-screen. When she spoke again, her tone had not changed, still calm, still measured, but something in her eyes suggested she was weighing her next words very carefully. Admiral Torvex, I find it difficult to believe that a fleet the size of yours simply happened upon this location during routine monitoring. Records our people have kept for generations indicate your coalition has maintained a quarantine boundary around this system for over 200 years. That is not routine monitoring. That is deliberate avoidance, ended today by your own choice, to come closer than any of your ships ever have before. Thessa's breath caught. Elena Voss knew about the quarantine, not just suspected it, knew about it, with enough confidence to state it plainly to a coalition admiral. That meant humanity had been watching the coalition just as carefully as the coalition had been watching Earth, perhaps even more carefully, for the entire duration of the supposed quarantine. Admiral Torvex's expression did not change, but Thessa, watching the exchange from her own bridge, could see the slight stiffening in his posture that betrayed his surprise. You are well informed, Commander Voss, he said carefully. I will not insult you by denying what you already know. Yes, a quarantine order has existed on this system for a very long time. I do not know the original reason for it. I was hoping you might be able to help me understand. Another pause. When Voss spoke again, there was the faintest trace of something that might have been dark amusement in her voice. You don't know why your own coalition quarantined us? The records are incomplete, Torvex admitted. They state only that Earth was assessed as unstable and unsuitable for contact. No further detail was given. Voss was quiet for a long moment, studying something off-screen, perhaps a report from her own officers about the composition and readiness of the coalition fleet arrayed before her. Then perhaps it is time both of our peoples learned the full truth, she said finally. Admiral, I am willing to allow a small delegation aboard our command vessel, under strict conditions, to discuss this matter directly. But I want to be clear about something first. Go on. What you are seeing here, Voss said, gesturing slightly to indicate the vast shipyard and its now active fleet, is not the whole of our capability. It is a fraction. We built this in secret because we learned, long ago, that the galaxy beyond our sky was neither empty nor friendly. We do not know your coalition's true intentions toward us, not yet, but we will not be caught unprepared again, the way we nearly were 300 years ago. Thessa's mind flashed back to the old file she had read days earlier. The lost supply ship. 3 centuries gone, no wreckage ever found. She activated a private channel to the Dominion's will, sending Admiral Torvex a brief note referencing the record. A moment later, she saw him glance down at something on his own console, absorbing the information, before returning his attention to Voss. Commander Voss, Torvex said slowly, are you referring to a coalition vessel that went missing in this region approximately 300 years ago? For the first time, something shifted in Elena Voss's expression, a flicker of grim satisfaction, quickly hidden. So you do have some record of it. Good. That will save us time, Admiral. Yes. That vessel did not simply vanish. It was found, and its crew, unfortunately, did not survive the encounter. We salvaged its technology. Much of what you see waking up around you today exists because of what we learned from those wrecked systems. She leaned forward slightly. We have spent 300 years building on what we took from your people, Admiral, improving it, adapting it to our own needs. I imagine that explains some of the readings your ships are currently struggling to classify. The bridge of the Vantis eye went very quiet. Thessa looked at Corin, whose expression had gone pale beneath his silver skin. The advanced power cores, the strange alloys, the sophisticated engineering hidden beneath crude functional hulls. It all made a terrible kind of sense now. Humanity had not developed this technology on their own, not entirely. They had taken the wreckage of a single lost coalition ship and, over the course of 3 centuries, reverse-engineered and improved upon it, all while the rest of the galaxy assumed they were still a primitive, contained species incapable of leaving their own solar system. 300 years, Torvex repeated quietly, more to himself than to Voss. You've had 300 years with our technology, and we never suspected a thing. You quarantined us and looked away, Voss said simply. We took the opportunity you gave us. I would think, Admiral, given your coalition's own history of expansion and conquest, that you would understand the value of preparation. Torvex did not answer immediately. Thessa watched him carefully, wondering what was going through his mind. The situation had shifted dramatically in the span of a single conversation. What had begun as a routine investigation of an unusual sensor reading had become something far larger. First contact, delayed by 2 centuries of deliberate silence, now happening under the least controlled circumstances imaginable, with a fleet of 11,000 human warships arrayed in a defensive perimeter around their most guarded secret. Commander Voss, Torvex said finally, I would like to accept your offer of a delegation. I believe there is much our peoples need to discuss, and I would rather begin that discussion with honesty than with further misunderstanding. Agreed, Voss said. I will transmit coordinates and conditions for your delegation's approach. I trust you understand that any deviation from those conditions will be viewed as hostile action. Understood. The channel closed, and for a moment, silence hung over every bridge in the coalition fleet. Thessa finally let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, glancing at Corin and Wexa, both of whom looked as shaken as she felt. Well, Corin said quietly, I suppose we finally know why Earth was quarantined. Not entirely, Thessa said. We know they took our technology and built an armada with it. We still don't know what happened 300 years ago that made the coalition afraid enough to hide from a single lost ship's crew, instead of investigating and reclaiming what was theirs. Wexa spoke up hesitantly from her station. Captain, I've been reviewing the old file again, the one about the lost supply vessel. There's an addendum I missed before, buried in an old command log. It mentions that the ship's final transmission, before contact was lost, included a distress signal describing something the crew encountered on the planet's surface. The transmission was classified, and the full content was never released, even within the Coalition's own archives. Can you access it? Not from here. It would require direct authorization from Coalition High Command. Thessa filed that information away, certain it would matter later. She turned her attention back to the main screen, where the vast shipyard continued to hum with activity. Thousands of newly awakened ships holding their careful, disciplined positions, watching the Coalition fleet with the same wary attention the Coalition fleet gave them in return. Aboard the Dominion's Will, Admiral Torvex prepared to select his delegation for the meeting with Commander Voss, fully aware that whatever happened next would shape the relationship between humanity and the Coalition for generations to come. He thought carefully about who to bring, not just skilled diplomats, but people who could recognize danger, read intention, and, if necessary, report back honestly about the true scale of what humanity had built in the shadows. He chose Thessa Rowe to be among them. She had found the shipyard. It seemed fitting that she should be there to see what came of that discovery. He also chose Grask, his tactical officer, whose blunt honesty and sharp eye for weapon systems would be valuable in assessing exactly how dangerous the Resolute and her escort ships truly were. Rounding out the delegation were 2 senior diplomats from the Coalition Council's Foreign Relations Division, beings trained in the delicate art of first contact, though neither of them had ever handled a situation quite like this one. Most first contact protocols assumed a species newly discovered, awed and uncertain in the face of a much larger galactic community. Nothing in their training had prepared them for a species that had been secretly watching the Coalition for 3 centuries, quietly building an armada, and now spoke to a Coalition admiral with the calm confidence of an equal, rather than the nervous deference of a lesser power. This changes every assumption we normally work from, one of the diplomats, a lean, careful-speaking being named Halvorix, admitted to Torvex as they waited for the shuttle to be prepared. Commander Voss did not sound like someone meeting a superior power for the first time. She sounded like someone finally meeting a rival she had been expecting for a very long time. That's exactly what worries me, Torvex replied. If they've spent 300 years preparing specifically for us, then this is not first contact in any normal sense. This is a confrontation they have been rehearsing for generations, and we are the ones walking in unprepared. Back on the Vantis I, Thessa received her orders to prepare for transfer to the Dominion's will within the hour. She left the bridge in the hands of her second officer and made her way to her private quarters to gather what few personal items she would need. As she walked the narrow corridors of her ship, she found herself thinking about the strange calm in Elena Voss's voice, the way the human commander had spoken about the loss of an entire coalition crew with such matter-of-fact honesty, as though she were reporting the weather rather than admitting to salvaging the remains of a dead alien vessel. There had been no cruelty in Voss's tone, Thessa realized. No triumph, no malice. Just the plain acceptance of a hard history, the kind of tone used by someone who had grown up being told exactly what had happened, and had long since stopped feeling anything but grim resolve about it. That, more than anything else, unsettled Thessa. A species that could speak so calmly about war and secrecy, that had spent 3 centuries quietly preparing without a single flicker of doubt or hesitation, was not a species to be underestimated. She reached her quarters and sat for a moment at her small desk, pulling up the sparse coalition records on Earth one more time. She read through them slowly, this time paying closer attention to small details she had skimmed past before. There were notes on early radio transmissions intercepted from Earth centuries ago, recordings of human broadcasts that coalition linguists had used to build their early language databases. There were fragments of old news reports, entertainment programs, and government announcements, all captured passively from a distance, none of it suggesting anything more advanced than a species still learning to fly. But buried in one file, dated almost exactly 300 years ago, was a short entry that caught her attention. It noted an unusual spike in encrypted transmissions originating from Earth's surface, coinciding almost exactly with the date the Coalition supply ship had gone missing. The entry speculated, in the dry language of old Coalition reports, that the spike might indicate some kind of technological advancement or military mobilization, but noted that further investigation had been deemed unnecessary, given the planet's assessed threat level of negligible. Negligible. Thessa shook her head at the word, imagining some long-dead coalition analyst filing that report and moving on to the next task, never suspecting that the negligible threat they had dismissed would spend the following 3 centuries building an armada capable of standing toe-to-toe with a coalition battle fleet. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts, signaling that the shuttle assigned to carry the delegation was ready for departure. Thessa closed the file, gathered her things, and made her way to the docking bay, where a small group of officers from across the fleet had already assembled. Admiral Torvex stood among them, speaking quietly with Grask and 2 other senior officers Thessa did not recognize. "Captain Rowe," Torvex said as she approached, "glad you could join us. I want your first-hand knowledge of the shipyard readings when we speak with Commander Voss. You understand the details better than anyone else in this fleet." "Yes, Admiral." The shuttle ride toward the coordinates Voss had provided was tense and mostly silent. Thessa watched through the small viewport as the shuttle passed between rows of the awakened human ships, close enough now to see fine details of their construction that the long-range sensors had only hinted at before. Up close, the vessels looked even stranger than she had imagined, hulls plated in dark, matte material that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the dim starlight, weapon housings built with an economy of design that suggested every component served multiple purposes, and along many of the larger ships, faint markings in the human alphabet that Thessa's translation implant struggled to fully render, names and numbers stenciled with careful, functional precision. None of the human ships moved to intercept or inspect the shuttle as it passed. They simply held their positions, silent sentinels watching the small coalition craft thread its way through their ranks toward the massive vessel at the heart of the formation. A ship larger than even the Dominion's will, its hull marked with a single word in bold human lettering, that Thessa's implant finally translated, "Resolute." "That's their flagship," Grask murmured from beside her, studying the approaching vessel with a mixture of professional assessment and poorly hidden apprehension. "Look at the weapon emplacements along the dorsal hull. I count at least 40 heavy mounts, possibly more we can't see from this angle." "Focus on the diplomacy, Commander," Torvex said quietly, though Thessa noticed he too was studying the Resolute's weapon systems with careful attention. The shuttle was guided into a docking bay, aboard the Resolute, by a calm, professional voice, speaking accented but understandable coalition trade language, one of the few universal tongues used across known space for basic communication between different species. As the shuttle settled into its berth and the airlock cycled open, Thessa felt her heart's pounding with a mixture of nervous anticipation and genuine curiosity. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine not just the fate of this single encounter, but potentially the future relationship between two very different peoples who had, until today, existed as strangers, separated by 2 centuries of deliberate silence. Back across the fleet, sensor officers continued monitoring the human ships, still trying to fully understand what they were looking at. The numbers alone were staggering enough. 11,000 vessels, built over 2 centuries, using technology stolen and refined from a single wrecked coalition ship. But as the delegation crossed the threshold into humanity's most guarded secret, a deeper question weighed on everyone who understood the implications. If this was merely the shipyard the coalition had happened to find by accident, hidden behind a moved asteroid at the edge of a quarantined system, what else had humanity built that no one outside their world had ever seen at all? The airlock opened onto a corridor unlike anything Thessa had expected. She had imagined something rough and utilitarian, given the crude exterior of many human ships, but the interior of the Resolute was clean, well lit, and surprisingly warm in tone, with soft lighting panels lining the walls and simple, sturdy furnishings that suggested a crew who valued function but had not forgotten comfort. 2 human officers waited to greet them, both dressed in the same plain gray uniform Elena Voss had worn during the earlier transmission, though these 2 had small insignia on their shoulders that Thessa guessed indicated rank. "Admiral Torvex," said the taller of the 2 officers, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped gray hair. "Commander Voss is waiting in the main conference room, if you'll follow us." The walk through the Resolute gave Thessa her first real glimpse into the daily life of a species the Coalition had dismissed for centuries as primitive and unworthy of attention. She saw crew members moving briskly through corridors, exchanging quick words in clipped, efficient tones, nodding respectfully but without excessive deference to the officers escorting the alien delegation. There was a sense of discipline in every interaction, but not the rigid, fearful discipline of a conquered or desperate people. This was the discipline of professionals who trusted their training and their commanders, who had clearly drilled for encounters exactly like this one, more times than Thessa cared to imagine. They reached the conference room, a spacious chamber with a long table at its center and wide viewports along one wall, showing the vast shipyard beyond, still alive with the glow of thousands of active engines. Elena Voss stood as they entered, and up close, she looked exactly as she had on the screen, calm, composed, with sharp eyes that studied each member of the coalition delegation in turn as introductions were made. "Admiral Torvex," Voss said, extending a hand in a gesture Thessa's translation implant identified as a traditional human greeting. Torvex hesitated only a moment before returning the gesture, his larger hand engulfing hers briefly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet under these conditions. I know it isn't the introduction either of our peoples might have hoped for. Under the circumstances, Commander, I think honesty matters more than formality," Torvex replied. "Perhaps we can begin there." Voss gestured for everyone to sit, and as they settled around the table, she activated a display at its center, showing a slowly rotating image of Earth, alongside a timeline marked with several key dates. "I think it will help if I explain our history from the beginning, Admiral, rather than making you guess at pieces of it through old, incomplete coalition files." She began to speak, and as she did, Thessa found herself listening with the same fascination she might have given to any great historical account, except this history involved her own people's actions, seen through the eyes of a species the coalition had wronged without ever fully realizing it. 312 years ago, Voss said, a coalition supply vessel entered our solar system, likely by accident, perhaps a navigational error or an equipment malfunction that took it off its intended course. At the time, humanity had only just begun to explore beyond our own moon. We had no starflight capability, no weapons beyond what we used to fight each other, and certainly no experience with alien contact of any kind. The image on the display shifted to show a grainy, low-resolution capture of a ship in orbit around Earth, the shape unmistakably similar to coalition vessel designs from that era. The ship suffered some kind of critical failure while in high orbit. It crashed on the surface, in a remote region, far from major population centers. Most of the crew did not survive the crash. The handful who did were not treated well by the people who found them. Torvex's expression tightened slightly. What happened to them? Voss's face remained composed, though her voice carried a weight that suggested this was not an easy story to tell. At the time, humanity was deeply divided, fighting among ourselves in ways that seem foolish and wasteful now. Different nations, different governments, all competing for advantage. When word reached certain military leaders that alien survivors and alien technology had crashed on our world, the priority was not diplomacy or first contact protocols. The priority was securing the technology before rival nations could claim it. I won't pretend our ancestors handled that situation with honor, Admiral. Several of your crew members died in the fighting that followed, caught between forces who saw them only as a prize to be won, rather than people to be helped. The room was silent for a long moment. Thessa glanced at Corin. No, she reminded herself. Corin wasn't part of this delegation. He was back on the Vantis eye, and instead, caught Grask's eye, seeing her own discomfort mirrored in his expression. This was not the story either of them had expected. They had imagined, perhaps, some act of aggression by the crashed crew, some misunderstanding that spiraled into violence. Instead, it was a simple, ugly story of a wrecked, helpless crew caught in the middle of humanity's own internal conflicts, treated as spoils of war, rather than as visitors deserving protection. I'm sorry, Torvex said quietly, and Thessa could hear the genuine weight in his words. That is not the story I expected to hear. There's more, Voss said. One of the surviving crew members lived long enough to be studied extensively before she died of her injuries. From her, and from the wreckage, we learned enough to begin understanding faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, shield technology, concepts that should have taken us centuries more to develop on our own. The nation that secured the wreckage used that knowledge to gain enormous advantage over its rivals, which triggered a period of intense global conflict that very nearly ended in humanity's own self-destruction. A war, Torvex said. The Convergence War, as it came to be known, Voss confirmed. Nearly 40 years of conflict, fought partly with primitive weapons, and partly with early attempts to reverse engineer alien technology that none of us fully understood yet. 30 million people died before it ended, and when it finally did end, the surviving governments made a decision that has shaped everything since. What decision? That humanity would never again be caught unprepared, Voss said simply. That we would unify, at least in matters of defense and technology, and that we would prepare for the day the people who built that wrecked ship came looking for it, or for us. We assumed, given how our ancestors handled that crashed crew, that any return visit from your coalition would not be a friendly one. We assumed you would come seeking justice, or resources, or simply to eliminate a potential threat before it could grow. So we prepared for that possibility, in secret, for 300 years. Admiral Torvex sat back slightly in his chair, processing everything he had just heard. The quarantine order, he said slowly. It must have been placed after that ship went missing. Someone in Coalition Command decided that whatever happened to that ship, whatever threat Earth represented, was not worth the cost of direct confrontation. So they simply walled us off from each other instead. That would explain a great deal, Voss agreed. From our side, we detected occasional Coalition scouting activity at the edges of our system over the centuries, always brief, always cautious, never approaching closely enough to detect our preparations. We assumed you were watching for signs of aggression, waiting to see if we would expand beyond our solar system before deciding whether to act against us. We built our shipyards deeper in the dark, behind that moved asteroid, specifically to avoid triggering whatever response your coalition might have been waiting to unleash. Thessa found herself speaking before she fully decided to. Commander Voss, if I may ask, why show us this now? You could have kept the shipyard hidden. Our fleet might never have found it if we hadn't happened to notice that one faint power signature. Voss turned her attention to Thessa, studying her with those sharp, evaluating eyes. Captain Rowe, I presume. The one who found us. She considered the question for a moment before answering. Because hiding forever was never truly our goal, Captain. We built this fleet to ensure that if the day came when the Coalition returned, we would not be defenseless, not be at your mercy, the way that Lost Crew was at the mercy of frightened, greedy humans 3 centuries ago. But defense was always meant to be a foundation for something else. For the day we could finally step out from behind that quarantine boundary as equals, not as victims waiting to be exploited, and not as a threat to be destroyed preemptively. When your fleet found us, I made the decision to reveal our full strength immediately, rather than let you discover it gradually, and possibly misinterpret gradual revelations as escalating aggression. Better to show you everything at once, clearly, and begin negotiations from a position of mutual understanding, rather than mutual suspicion. Torvex nodded slowly, clearly impressed, despite the tension of the conversation. That was a bold strategy, Commander. It could easily have provoked exactly the response you feared, if my fleet had reacted with less restraint. It was a calculated risk, Voss admitted. But I have studied coalition behavior patterns for years, Admiral, through every scrap of intercepted communication and observed pattern we could gather. I judged that a disciplined coalition battle fleet, faced with an unexpected but non-aggressive show of strength, would choose caution and dialogue over immediate violence. I am relieved to find that judgment correct. Grask, who had remained mostly quiet during the historical discussion, finally spoke up, his tactical mind clearly still working through the implications of what he had heard. Commander Voss, if I may ask a more direct question. 11,000 ships is a formidable number, but numbers alone do not win engagements. What is the actual combat readiness of this fleet? Are these ships fully crewed, fully armed, or is much of what we're seeing simply hulls waiting for completion? Voss did not seem offended by the bluntness of the question. If anything, she seemed to appreciate it. A fair question from a tactical officer, Commander Grask. I'll answer honestly, since I believe honesty serves us better than posturing at this stage. Approximately 7,000 of the vessels you see are fully crewed and combat-ready at this moment, with trained personnel who rotate through active duty on a standard schedule, much like your own fleet operates, I would imagine. The remaining 4,000 are complete, or nearly complete, but held in reserve, either as replacement vessels or as the beginning of a second wave of construction we have not yet needed to activate. 7,000 fully crewed warships, Grask repeated slowly. That is a standing force larger than the entire active coalition battle fleet, across all border sectors combined. I am aware, Voss said simply. It was not built lightly, Commander, nor without significant cost to our own civilization. Resources that could have gone toward improving daily life for billions of people instead went toward plating hulls and training crews for a threat we hoped, every single year, would never actually arrive. I do not say that to make you feel guilty. I say it so you understand the scale of what fear and uncertainty can drive a determined species to build, given enough time and enough reason to believe the alternative is annihilation. Torvex absorbed this in silence for a moment, before asking his own question. And the crews themselves, Commander, are they aware of exactly what they are being asked to prepare for? Do the people of Earth know about the coalition at all, or has this remained a secret even from your own population? A mix of both, Admiral, Voss said. The broader population knows that Earth maintains what we call the Continuity Fleet, a defensive force built after the Convergence War to protect against future threats, though most citizens believe that threat to be largely theoretical, a precaution rather than an active concern. Only a smaller circle within our government and military command structure has understood the full details of the crashed coalition vessel and the quarantine we suspected was watching us. The crews who serve aboard these ships are told enough to understand the seriousness of their duty, but the full history you've heard today has, until now, been closely guarded information. That will need to change, Torvex observed. If our peoples are to move toward any kind of normal relationship, secrecy on this scale cannot continue indefinitely on either side. I agree, Voss said. And I suspect that once your report reaches Coalition Council, secrecy will become considerably more difficult to maintain, regardless of anyone's preference. Word of this discovery will not stay contained for long, not with a fleet as large as yours, Admiral, having witnessed it firsthand. Halvorix, who had remained largely quiet throughout the historical account, finally leaned forward to speak, his careful diplomat's tone measured and thoughtful. Commander Voss, on behalf of the Coalition Council's Foreign Relations Division, I want to ask about intentions going forward, beyond simply defense. You mentioned trade, cultural exchange, formal relations. Does Earth wish to eventually join the broader community of coalition worlds, or does your people prefer to remain independent, engaging only as circumstances require? Voss considered the question carefully before answering. That is a decision that will require far broader consultation than I alone can provide, Ambassador Halvorix. Speaking only for myself, I believe isolation serves no one well in the long run. A galaxy this vast surely holds more value in cooperation than in permanent separation. But I would be lying if I claimed the majority of my people share that view without reservation. 3 centuries of fear and secrecy leave deep marks on a civilization's collective mindset. Trust, once broken as thoroughly as it was broken by what happened to your crew 300 years ago, is not rebuilt quickly or easily, no matter how sincere the intentions on either side. A reasonable caution, Halvorix said. The Council will likely feel much the same reservation, Commander, particularly once they learn the true scale of what has been built here in secret. I suspect the coming months, perhaps years, will require considerable patience from both our peoples. Patience, Voss said, is something we have had a great deal of practice with, Ambassador. 300 years of it, in fact. The conversation continued for another hour, moving through careful, methodical discussion of what might come next. Voss made clear that humanity had no interest in conflict with the Coalition, provided the Coalition had no interest in conflict with them. She spoke of a desire to eventually establish formal relations, trade agreements, perhaps even cultural exchange, though she was equally clear that any such steps would proceed slowly, cautiously, and only as trust was earned on both sides. Torvex, for his part, promised to relay everything discussed back to Coalition Council, along with his own strong recommendation that the old quarantine order be reviewed and replaced with a proper framework for diplomatic contact. I cannot promise how the Council will respond, he admitted honestly. There will be those who see 11,000 hidden warships as a threat rather than a defensive necessity, born from our own historical mistakes. There will be difficult conversations ahead. I expect nothing less, Voss said. But I would rather have those difficult conversations honestly, Admiral, than continue hiding from each other for another 300 years. Before the meeting concluded, Voss offered something Thessa had not expected, a brief tour of a small section of the Resolute, enough to give the Coalition delegation a first-hand look at how the ship functioned day to day. She led them through a section of the crew quarters, simple but well-organized living spaces, then through a section of the engineering deck, where human technicians worked calmly among humming reactor housings that Grask studied with unmistakable professional respect. Your engineering design philosophy is unusual, Grask commented, watching a technician make a minor adjustment to a coolant valve with practiced efficiency. Coalition ships tend toward redundancy through complexity, multiple backup systems layered on top of each other. Your systems appear simpler, but the components themselves seem built for extreme durability. We learned early that complexity creates more points of failure, Voss explained. When you're building a fleet this large, with limited resources, across 3 centuries, simplicity and reliability matter more than sophistication for its own sake. A part that rarely fails is worth more than 3 backup parts for something that fails often. It's a philosophy born from necessity as much as preference. They passed a viewing gallery, where several human crew members paused their work to watch the alien visitors walk by, curiosity plain on their faces, despite the disciplined restraint of their posture. Thessa found herself meeting the eyes of a young woman, perhaps barely more than 20 by human years, who offered a small, uncertain smile before returning to her duties. It struck Thessa, in that small moment, how strange this must be for the ordinary crew of the Resolute as well, seeing living proof of the very threat their entire lives had been organized around preparing for, walking calmly through their ship's corridors instead of arriving as the conquering enemy they might have long feared. Your crew seem well disciplined, Torvex observed as they continued the tour. Calm, given the circumstances. They're well trained, Voss said simply. Every person serving aboard this fleet has spent years preparing for exactly this kind of moment, even if none of us truly believed we would live to see it happen. Training does not erase fear, Admiral, but it channels it into something useful, rather than something paralyzing. The tour concluded back at the conference room, where the delegation gathered their things in preparation for departure. As the meeting drew to a close and the delegation prepared to return to the Dominion's will, Thessa found herself lingering near the viewport, looking out at the vast shipyard one more time. Elena Voss approached and stood beside her, following her gaze. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? Voss said quietly, not quite a question. 11,000 ships, Thessa said, built from the wreckage of one lost vessel and 3 centuries of determination. I don't think anyone in the coalition imagined a species could accomplish something like this while we weren't looking. We had strong motivation, Captain. Fear is a powerful teacher, and grief even more so. Every one of those ships was built by people who grew up hearing the story of what happened to your lost crew, and who understood exactly what it would mean if we were ever caught that unprepared again. Voss paused, studying the glowing engines still active across the shipyard. I hope, for both our sakes, that we never have to find out whether all this preparation was necessary. So do I, Thessa said, and found that she meant it. As the shuttle carried the delegation back toward the Dominion's will, Admiral Torvex sat quietly, reviewing everything that had been discussed, already composing in his mind the difficult report he would need to send to Coalition Council. He knew that what happened next would not be decided easily or quickly. Old fears, old assumptions, and old mistakes did not unravel in a single conversation, however honest. But for the first time since discovering the hidden shipyard, he allowed himself a small measure of cautious hope that this encounter, born from centuries of secrecy and misunderstanding, might yet end in something better than the violence both sides had spent so long preparing to avoid. Admiral Torvex's report reached Coalition Council within 2 days, transmitted through relay stations spanning half the galaxy. It arrived not as a quiet routine update, but as an emergency briefing, flagged with the highest priority classification available to any fleet commander. Within hours of its arrival, every senior member of the council had been summoned to an emergency session, and by the time the meeting began, word had already begun leaking through informal channels to other parts of Coalition space, exactly as Elena Voss had predicted it would. The council chamber, a vast circular room on the Coalition capital world, filled quickly with representatives from dozens of member species, each seated according to rank and seniority, around a massive curved table beneath a domed ceiling that displayed a slowly shifting map of known Coalition space. At the center of the chamber, the report from Admiral Torvex played on the main display, his calm, measured voice describing the discovery of the hidden shipyard, the activation of 11,000 human warships, and the subsequent meeting with Fleet Commander Elena Voss. When the recording finished, silence hung over the chamber for a long moment before the first voice broke it. 11,000 ships, said Councillor Dressenvec, a senior representative from one of the Coalition's founding worlds, his tone carrying equal parts disbelief and alarm. Built in secret, from technology stolen from one of our own vessels, by a species we dismissed as harmless for over 3 centuries. I would like someone to explain to me how this level of intelligence failure was allowed to occur. With respect, Counselor, replied Councillor Ithara Sol, a younger representative known for her more measured, analytical approach to council debates. The intelligence failure occurred 300 years ago, when whoever placed the original quarantine order chose secrecy and avoidance over proper investigation of a lost vessel and its crew. That failure has simply compounded over the following centuries because no one saw fit to revisit the decision. That does not change the fact that we now face a fleet of unknown but clearly formidable strength, positioned within striking distance of Coalition border territories, Vec countered. The question before this council is not how we arrived at this situation. The question is what we intend to do about it. The debate that followed stretched across many hours, then into a second day, as council members argued over the proper response to humanity's revelation. Some, like Vec, argued for a strong show of force, a demonstration of Coalition military might, intended to discourage any human ambitions toward aggression before they could take root. Others, like Ithara Sol, argued for careful diplomacy, pointing out that humanity had, after all, revealed their fleet voluntarily, rather than launching a surprise attack, and had extended an offer of dialogue that a genuinely hostile power would have had no reason to make. Consider the facts as we have them, Ithara said, during one particularly heated exchange. Commander Voss could have kept her fleet hidden. She could have waited for us to withdraw, uncertain of what we had found, and continued building in secret for another century if she wished. Instead, she chose to reveal herself, explain her people's history honestly, including the uncomfortable truth of how badly our own species failed theirs 3 centuries ago, and extend an offer of formal dialogue. Does that sound like the behavior of a species preparing for conquest, or the behavior of a species desperately hoping to avoid a war they believe may be forced upon them. Or, Vec countered, it is the behavior of a species confident enough in their military strength to negotiate from a position of power rather than fear. We should not mistake calculated confidence for peaceful intention, Counselor. Admiral Torvex, present at the session via live transmission from his flagship, was called upon repeatedly to provide his own assessment based on his direct observations during the meeting with Voss. My honest evaluation, he told the council when pressed, is that Commander Voss and her government are motivated primarily by fear and historical trauma, not ambition. Their entire military doctrine, as far as I could observe, is built around defense and deterrence, not expansion. That said, I would caution the Council against underestimating the resolve of a species that has spent 3 centuries preparing for exactly the confrontation many of you now seem eager to provoke. If this Council chooses aggression, I have little doubt Earth is prepared to meet that aggression with everything they have built. The mention of preparedness prompted further debate about the true scale of humanity's capabilities. Coalition intelligence analysts, working from the data gathered by the Second Battle Fleet, presented detailed assessments of the human ship's weapons, shields, and engine systems, confirming that the technology, while derived from a coalition vessel 3 centuries out of date, had been significantly refined and improved upon. Some systems, analysts admitted, appeared to exceed current coalition standards in efficiency and power output, a troubling realization for a council that had always assumed technological superiority as an unquestioned foundation of coalition security. If their numbers are accurate, said one analyst during a technical briefing, and if their fully crewed combat readiness matches what Commander Voss claimed, humanity currently fields a standing force larger than our entire active battle fleet across all border sectors combined. Even accounting for the possibility of exaggeration intended to discourage aggression, the scale of what we observed firsthand cannot be dismissed as bluff. This revelation shifted the tone of the debate considerably. Council members who had favored a strong military response grew noticeably more cautious once the true scale of potential resistance became clear. A war against a species with 11,000 warships, built specifically over 3 centuries to counter exactly this kind of coalition action, was no longer a simple matter of demonstrating superior force. It was, potentially, a costly and uncertain conflict that could weaken coalition security across multiple fronts, particularly given ongoing tensions with other rival powers along the galaxy's outer rim. Perhaps, Ithara Sol suggested during a calmer moment in the debate, this council should consider what humanity's discovery truly represents, beyond the immediate military calculation. A species capable of what we have seen, resilient enough to survive nearly destroying itself in war, disciplined enough to maintain 3 centuries of secret preparation without exposure, motivated enough to build an armada from the wreckage of a single lost ship that is not merely a threat to be managed. That is a potential ally of extraordinary value, if approached correctly. An ally who has spent 300 years assuming we intended to destroy them, Vec pointed out. That is not a foundation easily built upon, Counselor. No, Ithara agreed, but it is a foundation nonetheless. Commander Voss extended an offer of dialogue. I believe this council owes it to both our peoples to accept that offer seriously, rather than responding with the very aggression they have spent 3 centuries fearing and preparing against. If we prove their fears correct now, we confirm 300 years of human suspicion in a single reckless decision, and we may find ourselves facing exactly the war we could have avoided through patience and honest diplomacy instead. The debate continued for several more hours before the council finally reached a decision, not unanimous, but sufficient to establish a formal coalition policy. A diplomatic mission would be authorized, led jointly by Admiral Torvex and a newly appointed civilian ambassador, tasked with establishing formal relations with Earth's government, beginning the slow process of rebuilding trust between the two peoples. The quarantine order, in effect for over 3 centuries, would be formally lifted, replaced with a framework for regulated contact, and gradual, careful integration into broader coalition affairs, should Earth's government choose to pursue that path. The decision was not received well by everyone. Councillor Vec and his allies remained deeply skeptical, insisting that the council record their formal objection, and demanding that coalition border fleets remain at heightened readiness in case diplomacy failed and humanity's true intentions proved less peaceful than Admiral Torvex's assessment suggested. Their objection was noted, and additional defensive measures were quietly authorized along nearby border sectors, a hedge against the possibility that trust, once again, might prove misplaced. After the session adjourned, Councillor Vec remained in the chamber long after most of his colleagues had departed, joined by a small group of allies who shared his concerns about the Council's decision. Among them was Fleet Admiral Corvain Dask, commander of the Coalition's 3rd Border Fleet, a grizzled veteran who had spent decades defending contested territories along the galaxy's outer rim, and had little patience for what he considered naive optimism in matters of security. "Diplomacy," Dask said, his voice low and skeptical as the small group gathered around a side table. "The Council speaks of diplomacy while an armada, larger than our entire standing military, sits within reach of our core territories. I have seen this pattern before, Vec. A rival power reveals partial strength, extends a hand of peace, and uses the resulting goodwill to expand influence and gather intelligence before revealing the rest of what they've built." "You believe 11,000 ships is only partial strength?" Vec asked. "I believe we have no way of knowing otherwise," Dask replied. "We saw one shipyard, Vec. One. A species capable of hiding an armada that size for 3 centuries is equally capable of hiding a second shipyard, or a third, on some other world entirely, or scattered among asteroid fields we have never bothered to survey closely. I do not trust a peace built on assumptions we cannot verify." "So what would you have the Council do instead?" asked another councillor in their small circle, a cautious representative named Orvin Tess. "Reject Torvex's recommendation outright? Move against Earth with force, based on suspicion alone, and risk confirming every fear that drove them to build this fleet in the first place?" "I would have the Council proceed with diplomacy, publicly," Dask said, "while quietly reinforcing every border sector within reach of human space, and expanding our own intelligence gathering to determine the true, full extent of their capabilities. Trust, if it is to be extended at all, should be extended cautiously, with contingencies firmly in place should that trust prove misplaced." Vec nodded slowly, some of the tension easing from his shoulders at the suggestion. "That, at least, I can support. I will raise the matter with the Council's Security Committee." Quiet preparation, alongside public diplomacy. If Commander Voss and her government are as sincere as Torvex believes, such measures will cost us nothing, and if they are not— He did not finish the thought, but the implication hung clearly in the air among the small group. Unknown to any of them, a junior aide seated near the back of the chamber, someone who had remained quietly at her post organizing records long after the formal session ended, overheard enough of the conversation to understand its significance. She said nothing at the time, continuing her work with practiced calm, but she made careful mental note of what she had heard, uncertain, yet what she might do with the knowledge, if anything at all. Back near Earth, Admiral Torvex relayed the Council's decision to Commander Voss during a follow-up communication, watching carefully for her reaction as he explained the terms of the proposed diplomatic mission. "The quarantine will be lifted," Voss repeated slowly, processing the news. "After 300 years. Formally, yes," Torvex confirmed. "Though I will be honest with you, Commander, as you were honest with me. Not every member of our council is convinced this is the wise path. There are those who would have preferred a more cautious, or even confrontational approach. The decision to proceed with diplomacy was not unanimous, and it came only after considerable debate about the scale of your fleet's capabilities. I imagine 7,000 fully crewed warships tends to encourage caution in any negotiating body," Voss said, a faint trace of dry humor in her voice. "I won't pretend I'm surprised, Admiral. I would have been more surprised, honestly, if your council had reached a unanimous, immediate decision to trust us completely. That would have suggested a carelessness I would find more concerning than the caution you're describing." "A fair point," Torvex admitted. "How will your own government respond to this news?" Voss was quiet for a moment before answering. "That, Admiral, will require its own difficult conversation. Revealing the full truth of our history, our preparations, and now this proposed diplomatic relationship to the broader population of Earth will not be simple. Many people have grown up believing the continuity fleet exists as pure precaution against a theoretical threat. Learning that the threat was real, that it very nearly returned as conquest rather than dialogue, and that their government has been managing this secret for 3 centuries, That will require careful, honest communication if we hope to avoid public panic or backlash. Do you anticipate difficulty? I anticipate a great deal of difficulty, Admiral, Voss said frankly, but I would rather face difficulty honestly than continue the alternative we've maintained for 300 years. Secrecy has served its purpose. It kept us prepared, and in the end, perhaps it kept us alive, but secrecy cannot be the foundation of whatever comes next between our peoples. That will require something both of our histories have precious little practice with: genuine trust, built slowly and tested honestly, one careful step at a time. As the communication ended, Thessa Rowe, present on the Dominion's will for the exchange, found herself reflecting on how much had changed in the span of just a few days. She had set out on a routine patrol, hoping only to distinguish herself with some minor discovery worth noting in her service record. Instead, she had uncovered a secret 3 centuries in the making, one that had reshaped coalition policy, forced a long-overdue reckoning with an old and shameful mistake, and set both humanity and the coalition on a new, uncertain path toward a future neither side could fully predict. She thought of Elena Voss's calm, measured voice, describing 300 years of fear and preparation with the plain honesty of someone who had long ago made peace with a difficult history. She thought of the 11,000 ships, built not from ambition but from grief and determination, waiting silently in the dark for a confrontation that had finally arrived, not as the war everyone feared, but as a fragile, uncertain first step toward something better. Whether that step would lead to lasting peace, or merely delay a conflict both sides still quietly feared, remained to be seen. But for the first time in 3 centuries, humanity and the coalition stood face to face, honestly, without the wall of secrecy that had separated them for so long. Whatever came next, it would be built on that foundation, however unstable it still felt in these early, uncertain days. On Earth itself, the announcement came 3 days later, delivered jointly by Elena Voss and the highest civilian leaders of Earth's unified government, broadcast simultaneously across every major communication network on the planet. Billions of people, in hundreds of languages, heard for the first time the full history their governments had kept secret for 3 centuries: the crashed coalition ship, the desperate scramble for its technology, the devastating convergence war that followed, and the decades of quiet, determined preparation that had produced the continuity fleet, now revealed in its entirety above their world. The reaction, as Voss had predicted, was neither simple nor uniform. In some regions, the news brought fear and anger, protests erupting outside government buildings as people demanded to know why such a monumental secret had been kept for so long, why resources equivalent to feeding and housing millions had instead been poured into warships built for a threat most citizens had never been told was real. In other regions, the dominant reaction was something closer to grim pride, a sense that humanity's long, quiet sacrifice had finally been vindicated, that the sleepless nights and stretched budgets of 3 centuries had produced something that commanded respect rather than pity, from a coalition that could have simply conquered a defenseless world instead. Elena Voss addressed both reactions directly during a follow-up broadcast, standing before cameras with the same calm, measured composure she had shown throughout her dealings with Admiral Torvex. "I understand the anger," she said. "I understand the fear. Our government made difficult choices, generations ago, choices that shaped every life on this planet without most of you ever knowing why. I will not stand here and tell you those choices were easy, or that they came without real cost to ordinary people who never asked to live under the shadow of a threat they weren't permitted to understand. But I will tell you this, because of those choices, when the day finally came, we did not have to beg for mercy. We were able to sit across the table from a coalition admiral as something closer to equals and negotiate the beginning of a relationship built on mutual respect, rather than face an armada with nothing but our own vulnerabilities standing between us and conquest." The broadcast ended with a promise that the government would work toward greater transparency going forward, that the true scale of the continuity fleet's cost and purpose would be subject to proper public oversight for the first time in its history, and that the coming diplomatic relationship with the coalition would be conducted openly, with regular reports to the people whose sacrifices had made this fragile new peace possible in the first place. Not everyone found the promise reassuring. Within days, reports began circulating of certain factions within Earth's own military leadership who viewed the sudden openness toward the coalition with deep suspicion, quietly questioning whether Voss and the civilian government were moving too quickly, trusting too readily, after 3 centuries spent teaching an entire civilization to expect betrayal from the stars. These voices remained a minority, for now, but Voss was not foolish enough to dismiss them entirely. She had spent her career studying patterns of fear and mistrust closely enough to know that peace, once threatened by outside forces for centuries, did not become instantly stable simply because a treaty had been proposed. It would need to be built carefully, defended against threats from within, just as much as from beyond the quarantine boundary that no longer existed. 3 weeks after the historic broadcast, the first formal diplomatic mission arrived at Earth, aboard a small, unarmed coalition transport, carrying Admiral Torvex, Ambassador Halvorix, and a modest support staff tasked with beginning the slow, careful work of building lasting relations between 2 peoples who had spent 3 centuries as strangers, separated by fear. Thessa Rowe, promoted for her role in the Discovery, and given a place on the diplomatic staff at Torvex's personal request, watched Earth grow larger through the transport's viewport as they made their final approach, a blue and green world that no longer felt as distant or mysterious as it had when she first spotted the strange power signature near its hidden shipyard. The mission proceeded with careful formality over the following weeks. Trade discussions began cautiously, limited at first to non-military technology and cultural exchange. Small steps meant to build familiarity before either side committed to anything larger or more permanent. Human scientists and coalition engineers began exchanging research on materials science and energy systems, each side surprised in different ways by what the other had accomplished independently. Coalition diplomats visited Earth's major cities, meeting with regional leaders, observing daily human life with genuine curiosity that gradually softened some of the fear and suspicion that had greeted the initial announcement weeks earlier. Thessa spent much of those early weeks working alongside a small team of human liaison officers, helping translate not just language but custom and expectation between 2 cultures that, despite sharing a common history of conflict and survival, approached diplomacy in noticeably different ways. She found herself particularly drawn to conversations with a young human engineer named Marcus Chen, assigned to assist with the technical side of the exchange program, who possessed an easy curiosity about coalition life that reminded her, oddly, of her own eagerness as a young officer just beginning her career. "You grew up hearing about us as some kind of theoretical threat," Thessa said to him one afternoon, as they reviewed technical specifications together aboard the Resolute. "Does it feel strange now, actually meeting us?" Marcus considered the question seriously before answering, a habit she had noticed among many humans she had met, a tendency to weigh their words carefully even in casual conversation. "Honestly, Captain Rowe, it's less strange than I expected. Growing up, most of us just thought of the continuity fleet as this massive, expensive precaution against something abstract, almost mythical. Meeting an actual coalition officer, having actual conversations, working through actual problems together, it makes the whole thing feel more real, but also somehow less frightening. You're not some distant, theoretical menace anymore. You're just a colleague trying to solve the same engineering problem I am." "I think many of my own people would say something similar," Thessa admitted. "It's easier to fear an idea than a person. Perhaps that's part of what made 3 centuries of silence and quarantine so dangerous in the first place. Neither of our peoples ever had the chance to simply meet each other as individuals. Their work together, along with dozens of similar small collaborations happening across the joint mission, gradually built a foundation of practical trust that formal diplomatic agreements alone could never have achieved. Engineers solved shared technical problems. Scientists compared notes on shared scientific curiosities. Even simple, ordinary interactions, shared meals, casual conversations, the small courtesies exchanged between people learning to work alongside each other, slowly wore away at the deep suspicion that had defined the relationship between humanity and the coalition for so long. Not everything proceeded smoothly. Small incidents flared periodically. A heated public debate over whether Earth should share its refined power core technology with the coalition at all, given how that technology had originated from a ship crash 3 centuries prior. A diplomatic dispute over trade terms that nearly stalled negotiations for several tense days. Scattered protests on both sides from groups who remained deeply skeptical that genuine trust could ever exist between two civilizations with such a fraught shared history. Elena Voss and Admiral Torvex worked closely together through each disruption, their partnership becoming, gradually, the steady anchor that kept the larger process from collapsing under the weight of old fears and new uncertainties. It was nearly 2 months into the diplomatic mission when the trouble that had been quietly building finally came to a head. Thessa was aboard the Resolute, attending a routine technical briefing alongside a small group of Coalition and human officers, when the ship's alert system suddenly flared to life, klaxons echoing through the corridors in a pattern she had come to recognize during her weeks working alongside human crews as a combat readiness alarm. Around her, the room's calm, professional atmosphere shattered instantly as officers rushed to their stations. "What's happening?" she asked one of the human officers hurrying past her. "Unidentified vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel, at the edge of the system," the officer called back without slowing. "Unauthorized, not on any approved diplomatic manifest." Thessa made her way quickly to the Resolute's bridge, where Elena Voss stood at the center of a rapidly organizing command team, her earlier calm replaced by sharp, focused urgency. On the main display, sensor readings showed a formation of Coalition warships, smaller than the Second Battle Fleet but still formidable, emerging from faster-than-light travel, well within Earth's system boundary, far closer than any Coalition vessel had been authorized to approach since the new diplomatic protocols were established. "Admiral Torvex," Voss said sharply into an open channel, "your council authorized only the diplomatic transport and its support staff for entry into this system. Explain the presence of an armed battle group." There was a tense pause before Torvex's voice came back, and Thessa could hear genuine alarm in it, an alarm that told her immediately this was not something he had ordered or anticipated. "Commander Voss, I did not authorize this deployment. Give me a moment to identify the fleet commander." It took only minutes to confirm what Thessa, watching the unfolding crisis, had already begun to suspect. The unauthorized fleet belonged to Fleet Admiral Corvain Dask, the border fleet commander who had quietly argued for cautious military reinforcement alongside public diplomacy weeks earlier, during the Council's initial debate. Dask's voice came through on a separate channel, addressed directly to Torvex, unaware for several critical seconds that Commander Voss and her staff were also monitoring the transmission. "Torvex," Dask said, his tone clipped and businesslike, "I've brought the Third Border Fleet in for a closer assessment of the human system's true defenses, exactly as the Security Committee authorized weeks ago. Diplomacy is fine as far as it goes, but this council cannot commit to a lasting relationship without full, verified intelligence on what we're actually dealing with. I intend to conduct a thorough sensor sweep of their remaining shipyard capacity before—" "Admiral Dask," Torvex interrupted, his voice hard with barely controlled anger. "You have just violated the explicit terms of the diplomatic agreement negotiated with this government, terms this council formally approved. Withdraw your fleet immediately, or you will single-handedly undo 2 months of careful work, and very possibly trigger the exact conflict this entire mission was designed to prevent." "The Security Committee authorized precautionary reinforcement," Dask replied, unmoved. "I am well within my mandate." "Your mandate did not include entering this system without diplomatic clearance," Torvex snapped. On the Resolute's bridge, Elena Voss watched the exchange with an expression Thessa had not seen on her before, a controlled but unmistakable fury, tempered by the discipline of someone who had trained her entire life not to let emotion override careful judgment, even in a moment as dangerous as this one. She turned to her tactical officer, her voice steady despite the tension visible in her shoulders. "Status of our fleet response." "The continuity fleet is moving to intercept positions automatically, Commander, per standing defensive protocol," the officer reported. "Estimated time to full interception formation around the unauthorized Coalition vessels, 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Thessa felt her stomach twist as she understood the danger of the moment with sudden, sharp clarity. In 4 minutes, thousands of human warships, their automated defensive protocols responding exactly as they had been designed to respond for 3 centuries, would surround an unauthorized Coalition battle group deep within Earth's system boundary. If Dask's fleet reacted with anything resembling aggression, if a single weapon system so much as powered up in a way that could be interpreted as hostile, the fragile peace built over the past 2 months could collapse into exactly the war both sides had spent so long fearing. "Commander Voss," Torvek said urgently, still on the open channel, "I am formally ordering Admiral Dask to withdraw, but I do not have direct tactical authority over his fleet in this moment. I need you to trust that this council, and this mission, did not authorize this action, and to give me time to resolve it through proper channels, rather than through your automated defenses." Voss was silent for a long moment, studying the tactical display, weighing 3 centuries of carefully cultivated caution against the fragile trust she had spent 2 months building with this particular coalition admiral. Finally she spoke, her voice carrying clearly across both channels. "Admiral Torvex, I am halting our automated interception protocol, against my own better instincts, because I believe you when you say this was not authorized. But I want it clearly understood, by you and by Admiral Dask both, that this fleet remains fully capable of responding to any hostile action within seconds. I am extending trust here, Admiral. I would ask that trust be honored quickly." "Understood, Commander. Thank you." Torvex's voice shifted immediately, hard and commanding as he addressed Dask directly. "Admiral Dask, this is a direct order from your superior officer, backed by full council authority under the diplomatic agreement currently in effect. Withdraw your fleet from this system immediately, or I will personally recommend your court-martial for jeopardizing a council-sanctioned diplomatic mission and endangering the lives of every coalition citizen currently present on this mission, myself included." There was a long, tense pause before Dask finally responded, his voice tight with barely suppressed frustration. "Withdrawing, Admiral. For the record, I maintain that this council is proceeding with dangerous naivety, and that this incident only proves the necessity of the caution I have argued for from the beginning." "Your objection is noted, Admiral. Now withdraw your fleet." Thessa watched on the tactical display as the unauthorized coalition battle group slowly reversed course, engines flaring as they prepared to jump back beyond the system boundary. The tension on the Resolute's bridge did not ease immediately, every officer remaining alert and focused until sensors confirmed the fleet had fully departed the system, the immediate crisis finally, genuinely resolved. Elena Voss let out a slow breath, some of the rigid tension leaving her shoulders as the threat display cleared. She turned to Thessa, who had remained quietly near the back of the bridge throughout the entire crisis, watching everything unfold with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Captain Rowe," Voss said, "I imagine that was an illuminating demonstration of exactly how fragile this new peace remains." "It was," Thessa agreed. "Commander, for what it's worth, I don't believe Admiral Torvex had any part in that. He seemed as alarmed as you were." "I believe that as well," Voss said. "Which is precisely why I chose to trust his word rather than my own automated defenses. But make no mistake, Captain, if Admiral Dask, or anyone like him on either side of this new relationship, forces a similar incident again, I may not have the luxury of extending that trust a second time. Peace between our peoples cannot survive repeated tests of this kind, however well-intentioned the diplomats working to preserve it might be." In the days that followed, the incident became a pivotal moment in the ongoing relationship between Earth and the Coalition, though not in the way Admiral Dask had likely hoped. Rather than proving the necessity of aggressive caution, the crisis demonstrated something else entirely, that both sides, faced with genuine danger, had chosen restraint over escalation, trust over suspicion, even under enormous pressure. Admiral Torvex's swift, decisive handling of the situation, and Commander Voss's willingness to extend trust despite 3 centuries of ingrained caution, became held up by supporters on both sides as proof that the new relationship, however fragile, was capable of surviving real tests rather than collapsing at the first sign of trouble. Counselor Vec, informed of the full incident and Admiral Dask's role in provoking it, withdrew his continued objections to the diplomatic mission, whether out of genuine reconsideration or simple political caution given how badly the incident had reflected on his allies. Thessa was never entirely certain. Admiral Dask himself faced formal review by the Council's Security Committee, his career effectively ended by an action he had genuinely believed served coalition security, but which instead very nearly destroyed the fragile peace 2 months of careful diplomacy had worked to build. In the weeks following the Dask incident, the diplomatic mission entered a new phase, one marked by cautious but genuine acceleration. Where earlier negotiations had proceeded slowly, Hedged by suspicion and careful legal language, the shared crisis seemed to have burned away some of the remaining hesitation on both sides, replaced by a clearer sense of what was truly at stake. Formal trade agreements were signed within a month, covering non-military technology exchange, resource sharing along mutually agreed boundaries, and the beginning of a structured program allowing limited numbers of human citizens to travel beyond their solar system for the first time in their species' history, accompanied by coalition escorts as both a safety measure and a gesture of continued goodwill. Thessa was assigned to lead one such early group, a small delegation of human scientists and cultural representatives making their first journey to a coalition world. A modest agricultural planet several sectors away chosen specifically for its low political significance. A safe, quiet place for humanity's first true steps beyond their own system to unfold without excessive scrutiny or pressure. She watched the human delegates during the journey, noting their mixture of nervous excitement and careful composure. The same disciplined calm she had first observed aboard the Resolute months earlier, now turned toward wonder instead of wariness. "It's strange," said one of the delegates, an older woman named Dr. Amara Okafor, as she watched an unfamiliar star system come into view through the transport's viewport. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about what might be out here, back before any of us knew the truth. She always imagined monsters. I don't think she ever imagined something like this." "What did you imagine?" Thessa asked. Dr. Okafor considered the question thoughtfully. "Honestly, Captain Rowe, I'm not sure I ever let myself imagine anything at all. It felt safer not to hope for something we might never actually get to see." The journey continued without incident, humanity's first true delegation beyond their own solar system, arriving safely at their destination, greeted with cautious curiosity by the local coalition population, most of whom had, until recently, known Earth only as a distant, quarantined mystery. Small moments of genuine connection emerged throughout the visit, shared meals between species meeting for the first time, careful but earnest attempts at cultural exchange, scientific collaborations that produced results neither civilization could have achieved as easily alone. It was a small step, modest in scale, compared to the vast armada that had first announced humanity's existence to the coalition, but Thessa understood, watching it unfold, that small steps of exactly this kind were precisely what the fragile new relationship most needed to survive and grow stronger. 6 months after the initial discovery of the hidden shipyard, Thessa Rowe stood once again in that same vast structure, now humming with a very different kind of activity. Joint teams of human and coalition engineers worked side by side across several of the shipyard's massive frames, no longer building warships in secret, but constructing something new, a small fleet of joint exploration vessels, designed collaboratively, meant to chart unexplored regions of space neither civilization had ventured into alone. It was a modest beginning, a handful of ships compared to the 11,000 that had first announced humanity's hidden strength to a startled coalition fleet, but it represented something the original armada never could, a future built together, rather than a defense built alone in fearful anticipation of a threat that, in the end, both sides had chosen not to become. Elena Voss found her standing near a viewport overlooking the construction, watching the careful, cooperative work below, with quiet satisfaction. "It's strange," Voss said, coming to stand beside her. 300 years. We built ships to fight a war we hoped would never come. Now we're building ships to explore a future we never dared imagine was possible. "Do you think it will last?" Thessa asked. "The peace, I mean. After everything. The history, the mistrust, incidents like Admiral Dask's fleet showing up uninvited?" Voss considered the question for a long moment before answering, her eyes still fixed on the joint construction work below. "I don't know, Captain. I've learned not to promise certainty about the future, not after everything my people have lived through. But I know this: 300 years ago, we built an armada out of fear, convinced that violence was the only language the galaxy beyond our sky would ever speak to us. Today, we're building something different, out of cautious hope instead. That alone feels like progress worth protecting, however uncertain the road ahead might still be." Thessa nodded, watching the engineers below continue their careful, cooperative work, human and coalition hands building something new together, in the same shipyard that had once held humanity's most guarded secret. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever fears and suspicions would need to be slowly, patiently worked through in the years to come. This moment, at least, felt like proof that the long, cold silence between two civilizations had finally, truly, begun to end. Behind them, in the depths of the ancient shipyard, the last of the original 11,000 warships remained on standby, engines quiet but ready, a silent reminder of everything it had taken to reach this fragile, hopeful beginning, and a promise, still carefully kept, that humanity would never again be caught unprepared, should the peace they were building now ever fail to hold.